story here, where we left off last time. We were deciding what is a crustacean. And we really want to think about why we would even use a crustacean, right? To think about aggression in any way, right? So what is a crustacean? That's a crayfish. For those of you from like here, crawdad might also be a word, right? That's used there. Crayfish is sort of the slightly technical term, right? If you're not actually going to, Chelsea, like the technical term is going to be like the genus and the species, right? And so the crayfish, right? Is like, or crawfish, right? And any sort of craw and something at the end is probably going to be what we're talking about. Also includes crabs. Yeah, no comment about that. Most of you know what crabs are, so watch out for those. Lobsters, right? If you don't know what a lobster is yet, it's okay. You're still in school. At some point in your life, you hope to get to that level where you know what a lobster is, right? So there you go. And stomatopods, right? Those are fun little guys, like snapping shrimp. Those sound really thrilling, right? They kind of look like a elongated, colorful sort of crayfish, which is sort of cool. And the cool thing about them is they actually have these water jets they can create by like snapping their claws, and so they squirt. They have like super soakers built in, right? Why else would we want to use crustaceans? Crayfish are like this big, right? Lobster are like this big, but crayfish are like this big. And you know what you can do with crayfish that are this big? You can put them in a cage that's this big. And that means you can put a lot of them in some place, right? Which is kind of cool, right? Montana, you've seen a crayfish nursery, right? It's really thrilling to see that, right? They're easy to maintain. They're easy to observe their behavior, right? You can just kind of watch them. You know, they're not going to do anything too tricky. They're not going to really hide from you unless you give them a place to hide, right? Get in their environment. And they do like to hide. That's what they do. The other cool thing is that there's easy access to their nervous system, right? Have any of you ever tried to access your own nervous system? No, John, it's pretty well protected, right? It's kind of in there. Crayfish, on the other hand, lobster, crabs, you know, any of these crustaceans, you can get to their nervous system fairly easily. So, for example, here is the like the ventral nerve cord. I mean, that looks like that's pretty accessible, right? It's kind of like right there at the bottom. Anybody ever looked at the bottom of a crayfish, a lobster, right? I mean, how many of you have ever eaten a crayfish or a lobster? Yeah, you get in there pretty easily, right? I mean, if it was a complicated endeavor, they wouldn't serve it to you on a plate, right? Where you can kind of, and it's open, and there you go. So it's easy to get to the inside of these guys. Researchers also like them, so this is a little side note. Because it's an invertebrate, they don't really care as much what you do with them. So the checks on your work are a little easier, right? So if you're going to work with mammals, for example, there are multiple sort of hoops you have to jump through, right, Dina? So you've got to have your IACUC approval. The DEA can come in on you at any time. The FDA might come in. The USDA might come in. I'll tell you, those DEA guys are frightening, even when they're in like t-shirts and jeans. That's when they're most frightening. True story, Bree. I went into work one day at grad school, and there was a DEA agent waiting outside the lab for us to make sure that we were doing. And he just went through every single drug record that everything we'd ever used, and made sure that it was perfect, and it wasn't. and thankfully we could account for everything. We just didn't account for it in the right way. But it was all there and accounted for, so no one went to jail. Although we could have for up to 10 years each and like $100,000 fine. So don't mess around with drugs, right? Is that? I mean, you can use that in multiple. Or you can apply that in multiple ways, right? But in this case, there you go. So easy access to that nervous system, that's really cool. The other thing is they have identifiable neurons. Because they don't have a lot of neurons, okay, you can identify them. That is going to be impossible to do, Emily, in your brain. Because you have the exact number of neurons that you have is a lot, right? So you have a lot. I'm going to write that down so you can remember. you have a lot of neurons. Okay? You're not going to be able to individually identify those neurons, right? However, in crustaceans we can, right? And they have, and they've labeled them, and we're going to talk about some of those names later and what they do. There are like lateral giant, medial giant. There are defense interneurons. You've got, my favorite ones are the jittery motion detectors, or jittery movement detectors. Those are kind of cool, the JMDs, right? Just in case everybody's got one of those, I think, somewhere located around their pants pocket, and it's when your phone goes off, right? Kind of like feel that. Anybody ever have like leg twitches and you think it's your phone, but you know your phone's not in your pocket? Nobody's, yeah, Abigail, go ahead and admit to that, right? Because it happens all the time, right?
Or I think I hear it. It doesn't go off. But.
Yeah, I don't have auditory hallucinations. But thanks for volunteering that.
No problem.
But occasionally the leg will, and I'm like, is that even my phone? Like, why is that happening? I don't know. And then I think maybe I need a hip replaced, but those are two different things. All right, questions about why we would use crustaceans? Oh, so the story about the animal welfare standards. I don't want to say they're less; they're just easier to maintain, right? Because they need fewer sort of enrichment activities, right? Compared to if you want to think about primates, that's pretty far away. But even like rats or mice, the things that you need to provide them are sort of, they need water, they need food, and then they like little things to hide in sometimes. And that's sort of the extent of what they need.
Can they feel pain?
Yeah, so that's actually a really great question. I'm going to go with, yeah. My feeling is if you've got a nervous system, you're probably going to be feeling pain, right? Because I think this is actually an important concept. Is like what's the nervous system doing for you, right? Your nervous system is really important for a few things, and one of those is to keep you alive. Okay, so don't try to shut off your nervous system. Like keep that going. Okay. Bree, one way that it keeps you alive is it helps you acquire food and resources, right? But the other way that it might keep you alive is to keep you from doing something stupid, right? And things that are stupid tend to hurt, right? And so I think you're going to recognize that there's some pain there if you're doing something that's not beneficial to your survival, right? So I feel like, yeah, they would feel pain. My guess is they even have, they have very similar neurotransmitters to what humans have. My assumption is that they would have, some similar hormones. They have stress hormones, so they feel stress, or they can be stressed. That's part of how we can study them for aggressive behavior, right? One of the best ways to get aggressive behavior out of someone is to stress them out a little bit, right? Especially if you're like taking away their food. You should try that the next time you go to like, I don't know, what's your favorite, like Fat Patties or something, like run in there and start taking people's, burgers and fries. Tell them it's for a class. I don't know, do you think that would like work as, because I'm thinking like, so like here's the other thing I'm thinking of, Abigail. I'm thinking of this for a moment, like if I run into Fat Patties and I just grab someone's food and I take it, is that, that is theft, right? But are they going to prosecute me for that? That's my question, right? Is that really something they're going to prosecute me for, like? I don't know. And so then I'm thinking like, so if you were to do this, if you were just like run in and steal people's food and see if they get aggressive, are you going to be criminally liable for something? And that's what I'm worried about. Because if too many of you get arrested, then I really think that will look poorly on me. If a few of you do, it's okay probably. But more than
Will you bail us out?
No. And it's not because I don't want to. It's it comes down to this. And surprisingly, this place doesn't give you a lot of that.
Not shocking.
So, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't tell you this joke, but I'm going to anyway because I think I should. So when I was in postdoc, there was a guy who on his, and I forget who he was, maybe that's a bad thing, and I forget who the quote was from, and that's kind of a double bad thing, but I remember the quote, And the quote was something like this. It went, "Going into science for the money is like going into the priesthood for the women." So there's not much of either of those in science. You know, there's not much money in science, and there aren't a lot of women in the priesthood. Just in case you were curious about that. Not being a Catholic, I just assume that's what people tell me. So yeah, so there you go, JP. It's not that I would want to. Okay.
Would you at least come visit us?
Yeah, I probably would. I would take some pictures for my non-existent Instagram. All right, so we have these identifiable neurons. This is great. When we want to do studies later, we want to stimulate a neuron, we want to inhibit a neuron, we want to see what that neuron's doing in particular things, we can measure that. It's really hard in people because you have like a whole brain nucleus with millions of neurons in there, and I'm going to have to try to, no, Jessica, I'm going to have to try to record from like millions of neurons. That seems like very difficult to do, right? But like one, I can do that. And so we can do that in crustaceans. This is also why like C. elegans is really popular, because it has like 308 neurons, and that's all you've got. We know all 308 of those neurons, and we know what they all do. So that's pretty cool, right? You can track these guys. So there you go. This is, by the way, a crayfish cut in half. So you can kind of see, you know, internal organs. And so I didn't realize it had like, this is called the gastric middle, or the stomach teeth. Sort of interesting. I know, right, Katie? It's really important, Bradley, to understand your model species too, right? If you're really going to put them in a situation where you're going to observe their behavior, it's really important to see why, you know, what their environment is like, and to really think about them, because we're going to think about something kind of interesting here in a moment. And we're going to try to, again, always be thinking about how this relates to people. All right, so crayfish and other crustaceans are also awesome because they have weapons, and these weapons are for offense and defense, right? So it's not just that they have attack or defense, they actually have both. And for defense, their biggest thing is going to be armor, right? For those of you that have ingested a crustacean, right? Quite often they come in their own armor, right? So you kind of get them that way. And so you've ever, you know, like tried to like eat through a crab leg with your teeth, you realize, you know, how formidable of a defense that can actually be, right? Oh, hey, Montana, something just hit me. You asked about them feeling pain. There are actually a number of European countries now who are outlawing throwing live lobster into boiling water.
Wow.
Yeah, so watch out for that. So I think that's related to the idea that they feel pain. I mean, otherwise I don't know. There was this study, so this is a related study. This is truly related. Hang in there. How many of you like fish? Like to eat it, not to do it? I mean, because that's like a separate thing, right? So eating fish, right? Actually, there was a group who did a taste test recently, this was maybe 2 or 3 years ago or more, in the last 5 years, let's say that, where they took fish who were sort of humanely killed, right? So they were like rapidly sort of like bludgeoned. And I know that doesn't sound pleasant, but trust me, like a rapid to the head is much better than like gasping and suffocating for an extended period of time, right? So that sounds like a bad way to go, right? Like, which way would you rather die? Like, head's gone, or let me just stick your head in a bucket of water until you die? You're gonna take the first one, right? Trust me. So they actually did a study where they had, you know, people taste this fish, right? So, and they actually found that the fish, they taste better if they were killed rapidly and humanely than if they were like allowed to like suffocate.
It's because of the stress hormones.
Yeah,
right? Wow.
yeah. So there you go, right?
Well,
So-
yeah, but it's the contrary for the lobsters.
Huh?
It's the contrary for the lobsters.
Yeah, I know, right? And
Yeah.
so that's I don't know what's going on there. So that's interesting. So there you go. But there's fish, lobsters. I don't know. Anybody make lobster at home and they throw the live lobster in? You don't want to admit to that now, do you?
I was gonna say, have you ever read "Consider the Lobster" by David Foster Wallace?
I don't think so. Is it about a
Your
lobster?
sense of humor and about killing lobster.
Yeah, I mean, I've got
So-
nothing against killing lobster.
Yeah.
That's fine. You have to eat things.
It's a good short essay.
I don't know. I'll check it out. All right, so we've got the armor. We've covered that. Claws. How many of you have ever been pinched by a crab? Let me clarify this, so keep your hands down for just a minute. Like the crustacean.
That's so happened.
Okay, your hand stays up, right? You're gonna raise your hand to that one anyway, because you're like, well, if I raised it the other time, I gotta leave it up now. They actually have some powerful claws, right? I mean, I don't know. Powerful claws. And so that's actually a very powerful weapon. For a lot of species, they actually have sort of what you see here, this sort of asymmetric setup, right? Where they have like one giant I'm going to beat you claw, and then they'll have this other like, but this is for peanut butter sandwiches claw, right? So they'll have one for feeding, and then they'll have one for beating, right? And so they sort of have two claws. Sometimes these claws come off. That's a bad thing. Especially, if it's like the food claw comes off, then I don't know what you're going to do to eat. So just hang in there. If this claw comes off, I don't know what you're going to do on Saturday nights. Because this is the claw that gets you access to like mating partners, right? Things like that. So that claw is actually really pretty important. They'll grow another one, which is kind of interesting. But in the meantime, some species of crabs, when they lose their claw, the new one that comes back, they'll try to make it look colorful because, as we'll learn in a few moments, like a colorful crab is more frightening than a non-colorful. That seems, if there's like a blue crab running at you versus like a brown crab, the blue crab's probably gonna get you going. So anyway, we have these sort of claws. Now in crayfish, for example, most crayfish, that asymmetry is not as obvious, right, if there is any asymmetry. Not going to be as obvious. Claw size is still important. Bigger claws is better. Right? So we'll talk about that. And this makes some sense, right? Some of this is related to, obviously, how powerful the claws are. They can pinch, they can grab, they can do all kinds of things. We also talked about those water jets, right? There are certain crustaceans that can use their powerful sort of snapping claws to create water jets. These water jets are so powerful they can stun and kill other prey. That's something, right? How many of you have ever been hit with a squirt gun so powerfully you just stopped running? There's a lot of pressure there. They also have antennae, and certain species will, not this guy because these are too small, that have bigger antennae. They'll beat each other with their antennae. Seriously, they'll just sort of whack each other. So you can use your antenna as a weapon. Tails, they can whack each other with tails. That happens too, right? So tail flaps and things. So they have a variety of offensive and defensive weapons here. So that makes them great for studying aggression, right? If you were looking at a species or a group of species that didn't have maybe the best defense mechanisms, right? So like worms, right? How many of you have ever seen an earthworm? It doesn't seem like something where I'm going to really be getting a lot out of aggressive behavior there. I'm sure they are aggressive, right? Or whatever. But I don't really see, there's not a lot there. It's like, oh, well, that one squirmed a little more angrily. I don't know, right? You don't always have these sort of observable things. That makes sense, right? So crustaceans in that sense are a very good model species, right? So we've got all kinds of cool things. We can see their brains pretty easily, right? Just get those little flip tops that come up. That's great. They have a limited number of neurons, so we can decide what each one of those, or determine what each one of those, that responsibility for each of those. They have offensive and defensive weapons. They've got easily observable behavior. They have very stereotyped behavior, right? So Brad, this is an advantage over people, and I know you're so excited to talk about aggressive people, right? And we will. Hang in there. But what can people do? Lots of stuff. That's the correct answer. And when people can do lots of stuff, then it's really hard. Like how many ways can you think of being aggressive toward another person? Right? Like a lot of ways, right? Like a lot of ways, Meredith. And you can do this by saying something kind of nasty to someone else, right? Or you can give them like a stare. You can kind of bump them, there's like physical interactions, right? You could be aggressive in another way. Maybe there's even like non-physical aggression, right? Like how many of you, and I know none of you have, how many of you have said something bad about someone to somebody else to limit their access to a resource? Yeah, right? It happens all the time. So you don't want them hanging out with this other person, so you're going to say, that guy in crabs or something, right? You make up some story. I don't know. How many, just think to yourselves, how many of you have said something that was untrue about someone else in an attempt to limit their ability to be successful in the future? It happens, right? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, it's fine. That's normal, that's a process. So there you go. But those things are very complicated and it's hard to measure, right? I can measure the intensity of antennal flaps, right? Because I can measure, like, how many times did you whack somebody with your antenna, right? I can measure that. But it's really hard to measure the intensity of the rumor you created, right? And it's also, like, some of these things, too, are they can snowball, right? Okay? And maybe you didn't intend for that. But, you whack somebody in the head with an antenna, I mean, that's, very direct, right? Input and output, they're very equal. Okay, so it's easy to measure. It's kind of fun. All right, questions about that? Hey, what are the important parts, other important parts of this crab, right? One of these is going to be the mirus. This is kind of like arm joint thing. We're going to talk about that later, why that's important. How am I going to be aggressive with my shoulder joint? Right? So just watch. It's going to be impressive. All right. Other questions? Anybody have a pet crab? That's not an outrageous question. Because of hermit crabs, right? How many of you have ever had a hermit crab? Yeah, that's a crustacean right there. Did you ever watch it be aggressive to other? So when I was a kid, we had this giant hermit crab. It was huge. But it would like beat up all the other little crabs. It was kind of mean. It was kind of fun because we had, for whatever reason, I ended up with a bunch of hermit crabs when I was a kid. All right. What are some natural contexts for aggression? And this is important again. Why, Brad? Because we want to understand what our species is doing so we can measure that and we can exploit that for our own sort of purposes, right? So right now we want to talk about the natural sort of things that crustaceans do, and then we're going to move into other, like how we're examining what they do in these sort of laboratory setups, right? So we can really think about this. Definitely going to be interested in obtaining shelter, right? That's not surprising. Most crustacean species, Katie, will defend their own shelters that they've created or that they've found, right? A lot of these will burrow in the kind of floor of the creek or wherever they are, right? The ocean, whatever. Some of them will make more elaborate. Doesn't really matter. Whatever their shelter is, they will defend that, right? They will, not only will they defend it, they'll actually attack other members of their species. We call them conspecific. Right? So this is a word you're going to see. Okay, what does that word mean? That means from the same species, right? Okay. So Katie, if you and Brad get into an argument, that's a conspecific interaction, right? If you yell at your dog, that's a different species. Okay. So that's kind of a key word there that you might need. So some crustaceans will try to dislodge other crustaceans from their shelters. Okay. Most of the time when this happens, the smaller crustacean loses. And typically, it's like absolute size, right? For the most part. Now there's a little wrinkle to this we'll talk about in a minute. But the bigger crab typically wins. That's not surprising, right? Why would the bigger crab win? Well, it's got more mechanical advantage if it decides to beat you with that claw. It's got all kinds of things, right? Now, Tyler, not always is this going to like result in a fight, right? Okay, so you look like a guy who's like a fan of Andre the Giant. Unfortunately, Andre the Giant is dead, but I think we all know Andre the Giant, right? So if if Andre the Giant shows up at your house, you should run and scream because he is dead. And that would be an unpleasant situation for everyone involved. But let's imagine it's 1982 and Andre the Giant is still alive. Okay, and you're out at Fat Patty's, which may or may not have existed then. I have no idea. Let's make it something like definitely from the 80s. I don't know. Anybody ever eat at a Druthers? No, nobody ate at Druthers. So you're at a Druthers. Trust me, it existed, I guess, in 1982. We're going to say it did. I don't know. So you're at a Druthers eating a hot dog. I think they serve hot dogs. Andre the Giant comes in and he goes, I want that hot dog. What are you going to do? You're going to give him a hot dog, right? Because he's 700 feet tall. I don't know how tall he was, right? He was huge. Okay, so you're not even going to bother with that, right? But let's imagine, I don't know if you have a brother, but I'm going to imagine you have a brother. I'm going to imagine your brother is a twin brother, right? So you're going to be about the same size. Now, if your brother comes in and he says, give me your hot dog, you're going to fight that guy, right? Because he's like almost the same size as you. You think, well, I can take this guy, right? So that's an evenly matched contest. And crustaceans make the same assessment. When Andre the Giant of crabs comes in, and there's like just a regular sized crab waiting, and it's going to go, I don't think so, you can have it. You're not going to fit in the shower, but you can have it. It's a little small. If it's an equally sized member of that species, then they'll have a battle. Right? We'll see who wins. Now, whoever's slightly larger will typically win. Now, there's some caveat to this. It's not just absolute body size, right? Claw size, right? So when body size is, and claw size and body size are going to be tightly correlated, right? But occasionally, you get somebody with a slightly bigger claw. That person's going to win over somebody else with the same body size, right? So claw size is going to win. In some species where body size and claw size are not well correlated, or not as well correlated, then individuals with a larger claw or claws are going to win, right? There's a thing called mural spread, and we'll talk about that in a moment. It's a measurement of how big your claws are, right? This is really going to give you something. I'm going to tell you something, AJ, that's very practical. When we get to that point, it's going to help you the next time you're on Halger Boulevard or 20th Street, or you decide to go to that like Domino's or 7-Eleven that gets robbed every 10 minutes. So there we go. Mates are another reason, right? So not just access to shelters, but access to mates. That's going to create some aggressive behavior in crustaceans. Don't raise your hand. How many of you have ever been involved or been the subject of some aggressive bout for access to mating privileges? Nobody wants to answer that one, do they, Bree? That's why I said don't raise your hand, right? Okay. That's a pretty typical thing, right? How many of you have ever tried to sort of like show off and impress somebody, right? Amanda, this happens, right? And you've seen it, right? You may not have done it, but you've seen people do this, right? You've seen people in their behavior and their actions. And it always starts with, yeah, I can jump that. Right? How many of you have ever seen someone say, yeah, I can jump that? And you know the whole reason they're doing it is for access to mating rights. Right? And that's how it goes. Quite often that ends up with stitches, lost teeth. Stitches might be okay. I'm going to tell you that right now. This is a heads up. Stitches in the right places and for the right reasons can create an interesting story and nice character background, right? Lost teeth don't. Okay? The only group of people who are cool without teeth are hockey players. And that's because they've got the money to get it fixed and the money to get whatever else you want. Because they're professional athletes, right? Okay, so if you play in the NHL, you can be toothless and still do okay. That's a true story. Most hockey players have really nice teeth because they're fake, and they just come right out. No, seriously, that's a true story. If you've played hockey for more than like 6 minutes, you've lost a tooth, and that's how it goes. Anybody play hockey? Is roller derby similar? Do you guys lose a lot of teeth? You don't have to answer that.
I don't know. Well, a girl lost or chipped a tooth last season. An indoor hockey league comes and practices after us, and
Yeah.
they're really rough. We've had to meetings like while they're practicing, and it's terrifying.
Yeah. They keep dentists in business.
Yeah.
Yeah. The dentist's favorite client, at least for a brief period of time, is going to be a hockey player. Once they get the nice implants or the dentures, then after that it's kind of self-maintenance. But up until then, you're making a fortune on it. So think about that. If you want to be a dentist, places like Minnesota, you don't think like a lot of people, but everybody plays hockey, right, Brooke? So you get the percentage of people paying a lot of their dent. You got to think about these markets, right? All right. So mates, that's going to be something. Oh, and mate guarding, right? So once a particular crustacean has sort of convinced another crustacean, like, yeah, okay, that's fine. We'll try to make other little crustaceans, and you fought off all the other, sort of guys. Then you know that that crustacean is going to guard that mate, right? So that actually has some interesting concepts there. Part of that is related to making certain that you are not like raising other people's children, right? Doesn't seem like a great prospect. Anybody like, boy, geez, I hope I find somebody that's got a bunch of other kids I can take care of. That's JP. It's not on the list.
Horrifying.
It does, doesn't it? It's like, I don't think I want to do that. And that's a pretty typical thing. There's actually, we could talk about this sometime, but we won't today, about like what you can learn about birds and step families, which is kind of exciting. You wouldn't think about it, but you can. So there you go. So mate guarding is going to be a thing. Like I said, size matters. The larger crustacean, or at least the one with the larger claws, is going to win. Like this guy, I don't think he stands a chance. I mean, those are pretty pitiful, and he's not very colorful either, right? I mean, look at that. It's almost translucent. That just doesn't, it's not a good look on crayfish. If they're blue, they're all, and we'll see some other, I've got all kinds of crayfish pictures today, so let's get ready for that. So this guy's probably not going to be doing too well. In fact, for many species of crayfish, at least what you'll find if you go out in the creeks here, but please don't. Again, most of you probably haven't paid your full tuition bill, and I need you to not like pick up some weird disease or poison before you do that, because the university still like owes me money for the rest of the semester. What little bit they give me, I want to make sure I get that. So please, don't go like taking a bath in the Ohio. Yeah, that's probably unfortunate. Beautiful river. So, lamenting the loss of the mighty Ohio and its majesticness. Or is it majesticity? I don't know, right? Whichever. So, small claw is not going to get you. In fact, what I was saying is, for the crayfish you're going to find here, there are two, actually for males, there are two sort of morphological variants. One has like kind of larger claws and they can reproduce, and there are ones with smaller claws and they don't reproduce at all. So,
I have a question.
yeah.
So, whenever they fight, do they fight to the death, or like what determines the winner?
Yeah, so we're going to get to that. That's actually a really great question. And sort of we don't know, but not to the death necessarily.
Follow up. Do they have like free nerve endings on their armor? Like, can they feel the pain of the attack, or would they have to pierce the armor into their?
No, I think they know they're going to, and I'll tell you why I think that. So hermit crabs, for example, we'll talk about this in a minute, they do a thing called shell wrapping, which sounds like maybe gift wrapping, but it's not. It also maybe sounds like a musical style. It's also not that. But what they will do is they will beat on the shell of another crab, and the shells are not like part of the crab, right? You guys know that, right? The shell is just like a longer, it's like a hat. It's a big hat, but it's a hat. So at least in hermit crabs, I mean, they've got to be feeling this, right? Because the other crab's just like beating on the shell, and the shell is not necessarily connected. It's not connected in any way other. It's just like holding on to it. So it's still getting some kind of impulse, whether that's perceived as pain. I mean, who knows unless you're the crab, right? I mean, I would assume it's not pleasant. So there you go, right? You're really interested in crayfish pain. Kind of interesting. So there you go. Like, who loves hermit crabs? Everybody does. Everybody knows what a hermit crab is, right? Or you've at least had one. Why do they call them hermits? I guess because they live alone in that shell. There's not room for two, right? It'd be interesting if you had like a shell and then they... I'm just trying to think about that, right? And if they couldn't see each other, like if they were pointing in opposite directions and one crab never knew that there was another crab like pulling it in the opposite direction. Seems like a sad way for crabs to live. But why hermit crabs? Hermit crabs, they carry their shelter with them, right? And so they're definitely going to fight for that. When it's time when they molt, which sounds really exciting, right? Molting. When they molt and they're like, hey, I think I need I got to upgrade to a 3-bedroom, 2-bath now. This little studio apartment I've had for a few years isn't cutting it anymore. I need to expand. They'll do that, and they'll try to fight other crabs for those shells. That's why. Have you ever had more than one hermit crab at a time? Yeah, and they always tell you have extra shells in there, right? Because they'll fight each other. You don't want them to get injured. You just want them to have a nice. You always want it to be a buyer's market for hermit crabs. You don't want it to be a seller's market. That makes a lot of sense for me. What about molting and reproduction? So what is molting? Sounds really, really thrilling and a little gross, right? So you kind of have to get rid of that armor periodically. You got to replace it. Also, through the developmental phases, the molts actually change the body plan, right, of the particular animal. Crayfish kind of make quick jumps. Other crustaceans, it takes a little longer, so they're more like stages in between. If you were to lose all of that armor, guess what's underneath of that? Like squishy stuff, right? Okay. How many of you are Futurama fans? All of you are going to fail. Okay, that's better. So you know Zoidberg, right? And the shell comes off, and what's on the inside? It's squishy. Right, that's when he's molting. So there you go. Mates will guard their recently molted mates quite closely because they're vulnerable then. There are some species that only reproduce, they reproduce at like post-molt, right? So afterwards, so that's when they're kind of ready to be impregnated with other crustaceans, right? So that sounds kind of interesting. So you got to watch that molting phase as well. So that's exciting, right? Who wants to get a crayfish just to watch it molt? Nobody.
The cat would probably try to eat it, so.
You can keep it in your refrigerator. I don't think so. I mean, they'll keep your cat away from it, I assume. But I think it's going to get the water too cold. That wasn't the best idea I've ever had. There you go. Brett, did I ever tell you my first science experiment ever? I tried to grow a plant in a refrigerator. I got a first place trophy for that in the 2nd grade.
Well, what was the result?
It didn't grow. It didn't grow. I had 10 or 20 different conditions where I had, I watered them on different schedules. I put minerals in soil. I had some of them in dark rooms. I had some of them in the refrigerator. It was weird because we had this bean sprout tray in our refrigerator for 6 weeks. It was kind of weird, but all the same. Hey, what about displacement? How many of you know about invasive species, right? So we have to talk about invasive species just a little bit here, right? Yeah, they're not cool, right? And so they tell you this all the time. If you have your boat in this water, then you've got to sanitize it before you put it in other water. How many of you move firewood around to various places? Don't do that, right? That's bad because you've got, parasites that get into trees and they'll eat trees, and we don't want to lose trees. Some crustaceans are invasive species, right? And what's really kind of interesting is the more aggressive species is the one that will displace the other species, right? And that just kind of makes sense. If they're all fighting for shelter, they're not fighting for the same mates, again, because we're not talking about a conspecific interaction. But if we're fighting for shelter, if we're fighting for food, the more aggressive species on average is probably going to win more of those battles, right, Jessica? So they're going to get more of the, more of the resources. So they're going to actually displace them, and this happens. Here you can kind of monitor these shifts in crustacean population. So those are all natural contexts of aggression. Any questions about that? It's not so bad, right? We've not even started talking about crab urine yet. Just wait. It's going to be thrilling.
I have a question about like their running away speed. I don't know. You didn't mention anything about like
Oh,
their
fleeing?
legs or fleeing or like fight, because you always think of like fight or flight.
Yeah. So they do flee, and they'll do it through these like tail flips. I hadn't really talked about that yet because there are some interesting circuits that are involved in and so actually it's sort of related to the developmental process, which is a great segue, Dina. Like it's almost like you knew you were going to ask about the next slide that I had, right? And I know you didn't, but thanks for doing that. So let's talk about it in development, and Dean, if you can hold on to your question just a moment, because you can look right here, right? Like, so that should be attack. Just edit that, not attach. Although attach and attack for it's kind of the same thing. Attack or flee. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. Crayfish in a hole are better than on the loose. That sounds kind of weird, but here's what happens. When crayfish this is really interesting. Okay. When crayfish are born, guess what? They're small. And if you let all of those small crayfish, now there are going to be variants in size, right? You're going to some be really, really small, and some are just going to be really small. Okay, and if you let all of those out into the environment, guess what happens? They all get eaten. Fish, other predators come by and they're just like, wow, that's a little snack. It doesn't matter that one's like this big and one's like that big. That size difference to a fish or to another predator is not enough to make a difference, right? They're just going, pow, they're just going to eat them. Okay? It's all going to eat them. But if the crayfish stay in a hole, right? And so what they will do is, remember that shelter that they defended? If all of the crayfish are born in there. Now some of the crayfish are going to be slightly larger than others, right? And that will make a difference between the two crayfish. The bigger crayfish are going to start eating the little crayfish. And I know that doesn't really sound very nice, but that's better than everybody getting eaten, right? This is part of them getting eaten. And so there's this sort of this positive feedback loop in these juvenile crayfish, where the slightly larger crayfish will eat the smaller crayfish, and then of course, because it had more resources, guess what? It gets a little bigger so that it can eat and keep eating, right? And so what you end up with is a handful of the largest baby crayfish actually growing and molting and making it out into the world to be able to live and reproduce and do other fun crayfishy things, right? Okay. But if you just let them all out, they're all going to fail, right? So that makes sense, right? There's got to be a training program, right, for crayfish. How many of you are? How many of you are not psych majors? All right, Dina, what's your major?
Biology.
Yeah. So you know about weed out classes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Why do you have weed out classes? Because if not, then you're all going to go out there and try to go to graduate school and just be abysmal failures. And that's going to embarrass us all. And we don't want to do that, so we want to make you fail now. Before you get out there and you really start spreading the word, right, that you're like associated with us. If we can handle it internally, cannibalize you before you get out there, then the people that do make it will be even better. Right? And that's how we do it with crayfish too. That's why crayfish in a hole are better than those on the loose. Because the ones in a hole can eat each other, and some of those that were slightly larger can get large enough to where they can defend themselves when they get out there. Right, Meredith? I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So try to eat your classmates so they won't outcompete you for a job later. You ever look around and you think like, these are the people I'm going to be competing against for a job? And some of you are like, oh no. And then some of you are like, got this. Just kind of depends, right, Brad? No comment on where you are on that continuum. That's fine. It happens. Don't be lulled into a sense of false security, though, right? That'll happen to you, Lauren. And then one day you'll wake up and you're like, oh, I guess I really got to do something now. I've just been getting by on the fact I learned how to tie my shoes when I was 3, right? And everybody was like, well, smart kid. Just keep moving it through, right? All right, so that's cool. Here's another like crayfish. That guy looks kind of gnarly, right? Compared to like, I mean, that guy makes him look kind of puny. Nice size claws there, right? So that's something going for him, right? I mean, you always want to settle down with somebody with nice claws. If you're a crayfish. So what's interesting about this, Dina, you were asking about this whole like escape kind of thing, right? So juveniles are going to be more likely to try to escape than adults, right? And that makes sense because juveniles are typically smaller, right? So if you're smaller, you're going to want to flee because remember that whole time I told you, like typically the larger crustacean wins, okay? So if you're a juvenile, you're probably not going to be the larger crustacean, right? You're probably going to be the smaller in that particular battle, okay? So you want to flee. What's interesting about this is if you kind of, I mean, they're kind of like kids, right? How many of you have ever seen a baby? Right? I mean, they've got like that big head, right? And they got these kind of like little gangly bodies, right? And then over time, their head doesn't really get any bigger. Like your head is not much bigger now than it was when you were a kid, right? So really thank your mom every day for that, right? But the rest of your body kind of got bigger, right? But when you were born, you had this little body, relatively large head, right, compared to your body, right? So then your body grew at a faster rate than your head. Okay, that makes sense, right? That's how it works. Crayfish are sort of similar, not so much because like the head's just like kind of here, right? And these other things. Over time, during crayfish development, when you are a juvenile, your like tail and abdomen are actually like a large part of your body, and your claws are kind of small. Okay, and if that's what you've got, if you've got a big tail and small claws, then you should flee. That just makes sense, right? You're not gonna fight off anybody with these little guys. But look, I mean that's a decent sized tail. Okay, so that guy's gonna be able to go away. On top of this, Dina, so we have to think about when we measure speed with animals. Quite often we all just want to do like miles per hour, right? Or you know, if you guys are really like progressive, you're like kilometers per second. I don't know, right? You want to get over to the metric system there in a heartbeat. But in animals, because it's I mean, like if you're comparing like a human and a horse, well, that's okay, right? Because I mean, we're kind of big, whatever, right? Okay, that makes sense. But if you're comparing like a human and a flea, you think a flea's ever going to move as fast as a human? I don't know, right? Maybe super fast, maybe super slow. What's really important is body length. How many body lengths can you move, right? And that's really important because if you are fighting someone else, how many of you have ever been in a fight with someone? Martial arts, how many of you are martial artists? Anybody ever taken like a free karate class? Pull off a little tag. Judo? Anybody do fencing? Shin fighting? Anybody into the good old classic British Isles, kick each other in the shins? True story. They still have competition. They'll stuff hay in their pant legs. They'll kick each other. Sometimes I wonder, right? Like how did the British Empire ever, like if they were kicking each other in the shins? And then I think that's why they all wanted to leave, right? Because they didn't want to deal with the people who stayed that kicked each other in the shins. So there you go. There's British history for you in about 3 sentences, right, Dina? I think you should write that down because that's brilliant. You have a limited range, right? If it's hand-to-hand combat, okay? How far can you reach? The arm's length, right? And so, how fast do you really need to move if you're in a fight? You could really measure it in arm's lengths, right? Like arm's lengths per second, right? Like how fast you need to move. It's related to the size of the animal, right? And so, if you're a crayfish, you don't need to move 3 feet from another crayfish to get out of its range, right? You got to move like this far, because that's how long a crayfish is, right? So you don't really have to. It's body lengths that are important, right? So when you think about body lengths, makes sense, right? You never thought about that before, did you, Abigail? Like how far do you have to run away from a lion? Just as far as its paws reach out, right? Not any farther than that. You run that far and then stop. I'm assuming the lion keeps moving, so you have to maintain that distance over time, right? That's good advice. So, we've got this body length issue, right? And that body length changes. Okay. But what's interesting, if your tail, everybody think like you're a crayfish, so you have to like put your legs together and kind of like, right? Because you're going to like be flipping your tail here in just a moment. Your tail is going to be what moves you, right? It's not the claws. The claws, in fact, are an impediment to you moving. Okay? So, in fact, if you want to be a race crayfish, like a racehorse, you want to have smaller claws and a bigger tail, right? Because that'll make you faster. Okay? And you want your tail to be most of your body. And when you're a juvenile, that's really the situation you have. Your tail is most of your body. You got these little claws. Okay? So you move fast. I wonder, Brad, there are moments where I think, can I make that joke? And I want to so badly. But I don't think I should. I had like this whole, I imagined like 17 crayfish up on a stand, and like 2 of them yelling at each other about claw size, when claw size really didn't matter, right? I don't know. Nobody was following me on that, but that's okay. In my head, it was hilarious.
I'm just thinking about Seabiscuit and laughing.
Oh, Seabiscuit, that's right. Oh, Seabiscuit's okay. That was a decent movie.
Yeah.
I met a horse that played Seabiscuit in that movie.
See, you
True story. True story. His name was Special Ring.
Excellent.
Yeah. So there you go. He was a nice horse. He was a gelding. Most geldings are fairly nice. If you don't know what a gelding is, we'll figure it out later. All right. I'm still thinking about this really great like cartoon show I could make with these crayfish, like behind podiums and things, but it's just. Anyway, so juvenile crayfish, small claws, big tail. The other thing is like, so that tail can move and it can scoot that crayfish, right? And it's all tail, so you're going to be moving more body lengths per flip, right? As you get to be an adult crayfish, your tail, I mean, it gets bigger, but not relative to the rest of your body. I mean, look at all of that compared to like this little kind of stubby tail back there, right? Is that thing going to outrun anybody? Or out tail flip anybody? Not really, right? It better hang in there and just like whack you with, in this antenna, right? He's already got this thing cocked back, ready to roll. So, the body changes give you a different set of actions, right, that are more likely for success. Okay. The other thing that's related to this too is axonal diameter. So axons are the signal, or the conduit of a neural signal, right? So it's going to carry that electrical impulse from one place to the other. Now, as that juvenile develops, that axon is going to be relatively large diameter compared to the length of the axon. And the larger the diameter, the faster things flow. Okay? But as the crayfish gets larger, and this happens to lobsters too, as they get larger, the length of the axon starts outpacing the growth in diameter, right? So at a certain point, as the length gets longer and the diameter gets bigger, then you can meet that demand, right? But at a certain point, you're going to reach that threshold where the diameter's not getting larger, so that signal is going to be slowed going to the tail. So not only now, Dina, is your tail kind of short and stubby, and it's not going to move you enough body lengths at one given time. You've got these big claws just like dragging you down because most of the mass is going to be sort of on that front end of you, right? It's going to really weigh you down and hold you down. On top of that, you can't get a signal to your tail as fast as you used to because your tail's all the way back there and you didn't make the diameter bigger, right? Okay. So this is kind of like cities who expand faster than their road systems, right? So at a certain point, you can kind of like scale up, right? But at some point, if you keep adding more people, you can't add more lanes, and so you're going to have reach a limiting factor there, right? A limit point. See? You never thought I would connect crayfish to city planning, but there you go. Anybody else have any questions about this? I thought that was pretty exciting, right? Okay. So again, changes in the axon diameter can determine attack or flee, but it's also related to your abdomen, sort of abdomen to claw or tail to claw ratio, right? So you can think about that.
Can they see the other person's axon, like neuron? Isn't that under the belly?
Can they see it? Like on the other, I don't think they have an awareness of that. I think they can definitely go like
You're slow.
short tail, big claws,
Yeah.
right? And that's going to tell you,
Okay.
that's going to give you an idea. So that's actually important, like being able to evaluate other people or other crustaceans, right? And determining whether or not, should I engage in a bout or should I flee? So that's something, right? So you guys can think about it, like walk around and like think about like, that guy's got kind of a stubby tail, but geez, he's got like, I don't know, giant forearms. I don't know where the claw is. I should probably run away from that guy. Or you might think, well, they're going to run away from me. They're going to be really fast. But if I ever do catch them, I'll just whack them with a giant antenna. So there you go. I don't know how this relates to people. You could try to like squat down and then like cram socks in your sleeves to make your arms look bigger. That makes you a little more. Jonathan thinks that makes you a little more crab-like, right?
I think that's a great idea.
You
You should all do it.
Because I'm going to tell you, you could walk down 8th Avenue at 3 in the morning looking like that, and people are going to run from you. I don't care. I mean, you've got like socks crammed in your sleeves, and you're squatting around, walking like a crab. Nobody's going to mess with you.
That would be a fun study to be a part of.
Yeah, again, I don't want to be liable for that. But if you just want to do it on your own for your own recreational purposes, just write it up. But it was my idea. Keep that in mind if it works. If not, these idiot students, they'll do anything. I've already got my line ready. Okay. Questions about that?
Can we get extra credit for like this, like the stuff that you recommend us doing? Like, I don't have a lot of
Can I get
things,
extra
but, like,
credit
little
for doing
things I have, I will give it away for
hamburger
extra credit.
Oh, jeez. I mean, I'm going to have to get that personal YouTube channel started first so you guys can upload videos to it of you like walking into the 7-Eleven with all of your socks crammed in your sleeves. I don't know, do you ever think about that when you go out somewhere? Like how many of you walk differently in different parts of town or at different times of the day? Yeah, right? I mean like, you know, if you're just like walking on campus, it's like 2 o'clock and everyone's whatever. But if you're, you know, try to, and then I put my arms up in the air like this. I don't know. You guys should think about these things. You can take a real lesson, practical lesson, from crayfish. I'm going to write that up. I don't think that's, I don't know. Maybe because they always have these like pamphlets they give out, right, for like how to be safe. I think I can make one. Hey, look at that little guy. He's the cowboy from the Village People. He's doing the Y. Okay, that was a joke half of you guys. I don't even know if there was a cowboy in the Village People, so I know they're all in costumes. Can anybody confirm who makes the Y in the Village People? You guys know YMCA, right?
Yeah.
Okay, who makes the Y? Can anybody confirm that?
Am I really not good
Not really, that's fine. Dean, are you going to check it?
I think I could.
You think you could? Well, what else would you be doing on your phone? But looking up weird things I say.
I know the cop's still around.
The cop's still around?
Yeah. He still does it.
Yeah, I think it is a cowboy.
It was?
Should I video just to make sure?
No, that's okay. We'll go with, I mean, it's what I said, you're going to confirm it, we'll just go with it. Okay. All right, so signaling, that's a great segue into signaling, right? Because we can, and we do this, right? We can send signals to other members of our species to say, don't mess with me. Right? These crabs do the same thing. Okay? One of my favorites is what I like to call optical urine. I made up that term. True story though. Crayfish have pores that are under their eyes where they can shoot out urine. I know, right? That's crazy. They're just going to shoot urine out from under their eyes. Now, here's the thing to think about. So you're in the middle of you're a crayfish, and you're in the middle of fighting another crayfish, right? And you got your claws. You want your urine shooter to be up in the front and not like down in the back somewhere, because it doesn't do you any good, because you're going to be shooting it away from you. The other thing is they can use kind of like their gill flaps, and they can use their gill flaps to direct where that urine goes once they squirt it out. Because they're in water, so keep that in mind. They're in water, right? You're like eating a cracker while I'm talking about like shooting urine out from under your eyes. So they're going to like shoot out this urine. They're going to direct where that goes. Kind of interesting. Okay, now at sort of a first pass, most of you think like, I've never been in the middle of a fight with someone and tried to urinate on them. Although I'll tell you, I think if you did, you win. I mean, that's a winning move right there, known as the sprinkler. I don't know. Nobody's going to try that. I mean, really, nobody's going to try that one. And that, unfortunately, Jono, would not be able to be uploaded to the YouTube channel. So, you've got these pores under their eyes, and they'll shoot out urine. Now, I know most of you aren't thinking, like, why urine? Well, one, you're in water, so why don't you, like, squirt some other liquid in there, right? Because it'll travel, right? You can't really yell at another crayfish, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, we can yell at each other, so we don't have to use urine. But, how many of you have heard of this word?
Pheromones?
Pheromones. Yeah, pheromones, right? How many of you have heard of that one? How many of you have purchased pheromones, thinking it would help you do something? Like scare off would-be attackers. Yeah, like you can purchase pheromones, right? Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, the jury's kind of mixed on that. Humans may actually not be able to perceive pheromones. They may be able to perceive pheromones. The experiments aren't conclusive. So I would save my money because I'm going to tell you, this is what I know, bro. Saving your money and having money are things that will help you, like attract a mate, right? Okay. And that's not me being shallow or assuming any of you are shallow. That's just the way it goes. How many of you would rather marry someone who was rich or someone who was not, assuming all else is equal? You're going to go with the bank account, okay? Trust me. I would. Right? Because it's about resources. It's all about resources. All right. So, we've got optical urine. Crayfish, lobsters are going to shoot urine out from under their eyes. I think they close their eyes first so it doesn't burn. I don't know. Lauren, you were the only one who thought that was funny. So they shoot out the urine. In this urine are signaling molecules that the other member of that species can pick up, right? That's why they're doing this. They're not doing it as, for any particular reason other than it is a great signaling device, right? Especially, Brandon, if you're in the water, right? I mean, Another reason not to go to public pools, and then you feel a warm spot, and you know someone sent you a signal, right? And that signal is, get out and take a shower. And that's the last time you go to that pool. Again, don't get in water with someone unless you're going to take a bath with them as well. Like, think about that, right? That's why I was never on a swim team. That and I sink, but it's a whole separate issue. All right, so crayfish. What's interesting about this? When crayfish urinate in the middle of an aggressive endeavor, it's still kind of funny, right? Because most of us would think like if somebody jumped out to attack you and you, there goes your bladder, you think about that as like a fear response, right? But with crayfish, no. When crayfish, that's like them really being aggressive, right? That's like you giving like a big bear growl back at somebody if they jump out at you. So they got these signaling molecules. When crayfish do this, they can determine the sex of the other crayfish, right? So this is not uncommon, that urine contains molecules that will identify males or females. This happens in mice. You can kick mice into the what we call the estrus cycle, which is the like, hey, I'm ready to have more mice cycle, by exposing them to male urine, right? So you can do that. That doesn't work. If you just like rub female urine around, and they're gonna like not excited about that. So you've got the I don't know, right? So I think about this like, if mice get turned on by smelling urine, why don't people?
Some people do. Yeah.
Yeah, but like all mice do, right? And so I'm not talking about like a subset of people. It's like a subset of people who get excited by anything. I mean, there's somebody who's like, whoa, pack of playing cards, and you know, and then the next thing you know, they're done, and that's fine. That's their business between them and the Ace Playing Card Company. But like all mice are excited by urine. Like all female mice, it's just like a biological trigger. Like if you stick a cotton ball that's been soaked in male urine into a cage with a mouse, female mouse, she'll kick over into the estrus cycle, right? But I think you can do this with people, but to a lesser degree. This happens with females who are at boarding schools, tend to hit puberty later because they're like all female boarding schools, right? So they're not going to be exposed to male urine and the molecules in there that'll kick them over into puberty. So if you ever have girls and don't want them to go into puberty, like send them to a nunnery or something where there's not going to be any male urine. But if you want them to go into puberty soon, like send them into a truck stop bathroom or something. I would check and make sure nobody's in there first. Just let them sniff around. So crayfish, they can tell the sex of their opponent. They can even determine sort of where that opponent is in the hierarchy, right? So, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but crayfish, for example, they create a linear hierarchy, right? So there's like a dominant crayfish, and then all the other crayfish below that are kind of like in rank order, right? So you can smell another crayfish's urine and go, oh, geez, that guy outranks me, or I outrank that guy, he's got to run, and you can determine that from the urine. What's really interesting with lobsters can actually recognize individual lobsters based on their urine smell. So that's like a weird one, right? So you can just like, I don't know, there's like 10 urinals along the wall, and you have to, yep, this one's Steve. Yeah, I can tell. People can't really do that, but lobsters can. I think that's really fascinating, that a lobster has the ability to recognize an individual other lobster just based on its urine smell.
How do we know that?
So what you'll do is you put two lobsters in a cage and you let them fight. And then later, you do that on several occasions, and one lobster will, so the test lobster, for example, it will win some bouts and it will lose some bouts, right? And then what you can do is you can take the winning sort of, or the losing urine, and then you can expose it just to that and see what its response is. And see if that lobster is going to attack or if it's going to flee. And then you can determine that how it recognizes. And of course you have to obviously, do more than that, because doing that would just tell you if it's dominant or subordinate to that particular lobster, but you can do this over, test multiple times and multiple combinations.
So would it like post up like that if it was exposed to the losing pheromone?
Yeah. So this is this particular reaction here is what's called the mural spread. Remember I told you those joints right there were going to be important. So what crabs or other crustaceans will do when they're getting ready to get into a fight, before they do this, they'll go, all right, spread them out. And they'll see they'll measure like sort of tip to tip on the claws, and whichever one, if there's a big difference, then the one that has the bigger spread wins and the subordinate kind of slinks away, right? If they're fairly even, then they'll probably get into a fight. So yeah, you would expect to see this response if it was a crab that was similar to or subordinate to it, because this particular move would be the first step in sizing up that crab or scaring it away. Because some crabs know, right? You just look at them, man, my arms aren't that long, so I think I'm done. If it was a crab that had beaten it in the past, you would anticipate that it would sort of scurry away. I don't know, I think that's kind of fascinating. Lobsters, who knew? Lobsters knew individuals, right? By smelling their urine.
Is that exclusive to just their urine, or is that just like their memory, like with recognizing things? I don't know. It's like like octopus. It's like also like intelligent. I don't know. It's like the same sort of thing.
My guess is that it's not going to extend to a lot of other sensory domains, and one of the reasons for that is. I don't know that one lobster feels differently than another, right? So if I was just like rubbing up on a lobster with my lobster appendages, I don't know that the tactile sensation I would be getting would be different from lobster to lobster. Visually, I mean, nobody's ever said, boy, he's got eyes like a lobster, right? You might call somebody like an eagle eye, right, or a hawk eye, for example. But you're not going to call somebody a lobster eye if they have good vision, right? Wow, that guy has such great vision; he can see like a lobster. I don't think lobster visual systems are that great, so they're not going to be identifying visually from one lobster to another, right? But I do think sensing chemicals, pheromones and other, it would be pheromones, is going to be the way that they would do that. It's like I think it is a testament to their memory, but I think it's going to be sensory domain specific, because I don't think that their other sensory systems are all that spectacular enough to go like, well, that's Bill the lobster. Did you do that, really?
Yeah, that was me, but I didn't mean to.
You can stay there. I thought it was my bottle at first. It already, the bottom's screwed up and it wobbles. So, there you go. Does that make sense? That was a good question, though. So what you should do is you should you should go to your local grocery store and buy a bunch of lobsters. And then, I don't know if this is going to be any more humane than throwing them in hot boiling water, Brad, but you could like make them fight and then see if they recognize each other later and then give them names. You can do an experiment. Nobody thinks that's exciting, but I do. Or you could just go out to your creek. How many of you have a creek? There's like a creek everywhere in West Virginia, right? I mean that's a standard feature, right? Okay, we have these things. Just go out and grab a few. Grab a few crayfish, right? They hide under rocks a lot, so you can just like pick up rocks. So that's something. Oh, hey, I want to talk about claw color. Lauren, you're ready for this. Brighter colored claws are typically more threatening, right? Also, there's a species of crab, and there are sort of three versions of the males, like three morphological variants. One, their claws are just like regular crab color. It's kind of like that reddish brown. The next one is kind of a bright orange, and then the next one up is blue. And even if their claws are the same size, a blue crab claw will always beat the other two color variants, even if they're the same size. So blue claws beat orange claws when matched for size. Now that probably is related to their visual system, Dina, but again, I mean, you're doing blue versus orange. That's pretty, that's kind of a gross difference, right? I don't know, my like crab facial recognition is probably not very good. I think all crab faces are going to be kind of the same. But that may not be true. How many of you know about paper wasps? You know they have facial recognition. It's actually pretty awesome. So they can recognize other by their face. That's really important. Facial recognition is important. If you live like in a social group where knowing who someone else is would be really valuable to you. Okay. I'll tell you this right now. I'm sorry, my facial recognition is not very good. Is not an excuse that most people will buy for unacceptable behavior. So just Meredith throwing that out there for you, right? Like, I'm not really good with faces. I thought it was you. Doesn't always work. All right. So questions about claw color? No, nobody was too interested. Oh, and then shell wrapping with the hermit crabs. That's kind of another sort of signaling thing they do. We talked about where those like beat on each other's shells to kind of let them know, like, hey, I'm here, you should get out. Just being polite. Just knocking on the door to somebody's house, telling them they're evicted. And then it's like a hermit crab melee. All right. So let's talk a little bit about aggressive behavior in general. Some things that can increase aggressive behavior, some things that might decrease aggressive behavior. The first thing I think to take away from this is crustaceans are angry. I don't know why they're angry. Probably because you guys keep throwing them in hot water. Literally. I'd be angry about that too. By the way, cold showers are better for you, just as a heads up. It helps fight inflammation. Any of you who like work out at the gym or something, it'll help with delayed onset muscle soreness. If you take a cold shower, right? Abigail, you didn't know this, right?
What about like arthritis?
Yeah, helps there too. Any sort of heat just makes things inflamed, right?
I do it every morning. It's great.
Cold showers, that's the way to go. Yeah. And if you live with someone who likes hot showers, they'll appreciate it too. So then it's like a double bonus, right? It's like plenty of hot water for you, and my muscles don't hurt. So that's why after an injury, they tell you to do what? Ice. You should ice it. Never do hot. Hot's bad. Hot will just cause more damage. Always ice. Ice bath, polar plunge.
And what about like with cramps? They tell you to put like a heating pad on it.
Try ice next time to see what happens.
Isn't that just for the blood flow?
It is. Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. Because you're, in that case, inflammation's not bad because it's a signal of increased blood flow, and so if you can increase the blood flow, that's fine, because then you're going to help or some things. It's like chronic inflammation or inflammation when there's not like a problem, right? Or you could try ice. I'm just like imagining now, like, I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, crustaceans are angry. They're angry. And this is like another great reason why they're wonderful to study when you're talking about aggressive behavior. They will attack it at a moment's notice. All right? They're constantly just walking around waiting on somebody to shoot urine out of their eyes. Okay? They're just constantly waiting on that. I mean, Bree, that would be, I mean, that's, like, if somebody really could, I mean, like, have you ever been so angry you shot urine out your eyes?
I can't say that I have.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, it's, it would be a tough one to do, right? Considering there's not like a connection between your bladder and your eyes. But, keep grunting and see what happens. All these life lessons, Brad, do you write these down?
Yeah.
You have like one line on your notes.
That's because I just flipped it.
Okay. So crustaceans are angry. Kate, that's wonderful for us because we want to study crustaceans to learn about people. What are some things that will make them more angry, right? Because if they're not angry enough, we just really want to force them to be angry.
How do
One,
you know it's anger though?
it's not really anger, right? It's It's aggression. Aggression is not really anger, right? And we should really make that distinction. Because they're really, I mean, it is for their survival, right? So that's completely different. If you are, I mean, if somebody comes up to you and you're at Fat Patty's and like somebody from this class runs in and tries to steal your food, you're well within your rights to like yell at them, throw a fork at them, turn the table on. I don't know, right? There are a lot of appropriate responses to that, up to and including a flying kick, right? So yeah, that's not really anger, is it? I mean, that's defensive aggression, right? And that's fine. It's a normal response. So maybe they're not angry. They're sensitive. Can I say that?
I was like, do they have like an emotion scale?
You don't like that? They're very sensitive to their resources.
So they're like tense, like constantly.
I would imagine they probably are tense all the time. They're always ready, like really, because it doesn't take much. They actually do have a very low threshold to get into an aggressive interaction. Humans have a fairly high threshold, right? You're not going to get aggressive if somebody comes over and says, "Hey, that's a nice house." If you're a crustacean, you might get aggressive. "Hey, that's a nice house. You're trying to take my house?" Because they probably are, right? So they're on edge. Can I say that? Is that acceptable? They're always ready to defend or attack when their resources are threatened. Okay, and that's true. And to the point that there's not really a margin of error, right? Okay, there's not really a lot of like, I'm gonna wait and see if this guy's really threatening me or not, right? No, I'm just gonna go ahead and shoot urine at him, just in case, right? Better safe than sorry. I guess they can create a lot of urine because they're always in water, so you just always just like drink more. Hey, you want to know how another interesting like sort of urination story? I know you haven't had enough of these. There are some Chinese sea turtles that will urinate through their like tongues, like out through their mouths, and they have these like special like sort of like, I know, right? So the reason is, so how many of you have ever been in the ocean? How many of you ever a little bit of ocean water? It's salty. It's salt water, right? How many of you know that one of the big things that you're shooting out of your body in your urine, how many of you have tasted your urine or somebody else's? Nobody's going to answer that. It's salty. There's a lot of salt in urine, right? It's mostly salt, water, and urea, which is the nitrogenous waste. Those are like the three big components, unless you have high blood pressure, you're diabetic, and then you're going to get protein and glucose, right? And so you don't want those things. It's a little sweet and salty. So you can always do like a home diabetes test. If it's just salty, you're fine. If there's a little sweet to it, you're probably diabetic. That's not exactly how it works, but that's pretty close. I mean, that's what they do when they do a urinalysis to see if they measure glucose levels in your urine, and if there's a lot of glucose, it means your blood glucose levels are too high, right? Because you have to get rid of that from your blood, right? So there you go. You can save $250 and visit to the doctor if you're diabetic. So these sea turtles, though, they'll sort of have their nitrogenous waste kind of like, like shake their heads and get rid of it. The reason is, so because you're relying on these concentration gradients, right, to get rid of salt, and it's really hard to dump extra salt into something that's already salty, like seawater. And so rather than creating like this whole extra sort of system in their kidneys, they just decided to shoot it out their mouths and not really rely on that concentration gradient. They'll just spit it out. That was a pretty good solution there, I thought anyway. You don't want to do that in normal situations. If you're a freshwater turtle, don't worry about it. If you're a person, don't worry about it. Hopefully urine keeps coming out the normal spot for you and you're good to go. So what can we do, if we want to make our crustaceans a little extra edgy, or if we want to kind of calm them down? Isolation and crowding will both increase aggression. Okay, so they're going to make your crayfish. So if you put a bunch of crayfish together, they're going to, remember that time I told you about crayfish in a hole are better than crayfish out in the open? Because they'll eat each other. Okay? So there you go. One of the things, though, that will sort of calm down some crustaceans are courtship displays, right? And it'll sort of change their aggression, right? So if you see a courtship display from another crustacean, you're going to realize it's not trying to attack you, right? And so instead of responding with your normal sort of attack or flee pattern, you're going to go, well, this might get interesting. And you're willing to wait around and see what happens. So that's kind of cool, right? Also urine. Urine can either increase or decrease aggressive behavior. If you're a male lobster and you smell male urine, that's probably going to increase your aggressive behavior, right? If it's not a lobster that you know, because you think it's going to come and take your resources. If it's a female lobster, on the other hand, that's actually not going to increase your aggressive behavior, right? But it might kick you over into those sort of courtship displays. So the lobster's going to do is, I don't know what lobsters do. They bring over a bouquet of seaweed and a box of
Saltwater taffy.
That was brilliant. Yeah. So there you go. There's your lobster date night.
Do they not fight the other gender like ever?
For the most part, they're not going to. They could, potentially, but they're not going to, for the most part. All right. So we're going to go through this stereotypical escalation pattern. Right? It's going to involve sort of spreading out your claws, seeing who's got the bigger wingspan, raising your body up, spreading your tail, trying to look as large as possible, right? This is exactly what I do every time I see somebody kind of sketchy. When I'm walking in town, I go. Not surprisingly, they leave me alone. So you can try that. It works. And you got to be ready to back it up with some urine out the eyes. But I just think about, those like little joke flowers that you could get and like squirt people with disappearing ink. If you just had one of those, but not disappearing ink. How many of you carry mace? So urine's not that crazy. It's the same concept. I mean, at least in that case. Brad, do you carry mace?
No.
Sorry.
I just pee on people.
You just feel that works. So there you go. So they have these stereotypical escalation patterns. Now, if one crustacean's bigger than the other, then the smaller one goes, I got no chance here. Why would I waste my time on this, right? I mean, how many of you would, in all honesty, try, because you think you can win, challenge LeBron James to a one-on-one game of basketball? Like nobody, right? Because you might do it just because, hey, that's going to be fun, right? It's like just for the experience, but you're not actually going to think you're going to win, right? And I just want to, I know some of you have real aspirations there for being in the NBA, Katie. It's not going to happen, okay? I'm just telling you, I don't think, I don't want to be like a real dream squasher, but it's probably not happening. So there you go, right? So why would you really try to waste your time? Like, I'm going to be, like, if all of a sudden you decide, you're going to be the world's greatest power lifter, for most of you, that's probably a waste of time. I don't see a lot of Olympic quality power lifters in the audience today. Some of you may surprise me, but I don't know. Dina's thinking, like, watch this. I've seen those guys on TV. They're huge, right? So I don't really think you have a chance.
Thanks.
Even in the female category, they're huge. You don't have a chance. So there you go. So they're going to go through this escalation pattern. At some point, they might decide to actually, like, let's start fighting. Because, we're about the same size. My claws are about the same size as yours. They're both blue, and make sure they're the same color. I've got some antennae here. I can whack you with those. My urine pores are about the same size as yours, so we're going to be able to shoot urine the same distance, right? So you're evenly matched, and they're going to get into this fight. Okay. Now, Montana, here's where your question comes in, right? Like, how do you know who wins? At some point, and really, just at some point, someone quits. Like, at some point, one of the crustaceans in this battle goes, I think you got it. I'm done. She wasn't that great anyway. I'll find somebody else. You ever been, it's like the laziest, right? I mean, anybody ever been in a situation like that and you're like, I really anticipated more out of that, but whatever. No, nobody's going to admit to that, Lauren. Nobody. And everybody's thinking like, well, maybe that's why that relationship failed, right? I didn't fight enough lobsters. I will say this, like jumping into the tank with the lobsters at the grocery store, that's another one of those moments where, man, somebody says, hey, watch this. I can fight a lobster. That'll really impress her, right? I'll even pee on it. I don't know, right? See, now I'm wondering about like cross-species urine signals. No, in like a serious way. Like I'm wondering, like if I were to squirt cat urine into a tank with a lobster, how would it respond? I don't know that anybody's done that. I'm quite certain.
Okay.
Yes.
Can we make that a class project?
If you'll collect the cat urine, yeah. Actually, you can buy cat urine for scientific purposes. There are a lot of studies where they'll study fear in rodents, and they'll use cat urine or fox urine as a. I also once saw this guy out in the middle of sort of nowhere who was selling deer urine. So they'll harvest deer urine for things. Like if you really want to like sneak up on a deer, the best way to do it is bathe yourself in urine. This is why I do all of my hunting at Kroger, because I am not taking a bath in deer urine. I'll tell you that right now. If it requires me to bathe in another species' urine, I don't need to be eating it. Right?
And you won't even get into water with someone else, so.
Huh?
You won't even get into water with someone else.
I know, right? There's no way I'm rolling around in somebody else's urine. I don't think I'd roll around in my own urine. That just seems unsanitary. Actually, urine's sanitary though, so urine's okay. The other stuff, stay away from that. Brad, is this related to urine?
No.
I'm only accepting urine related. No, go ahead.
So, like, crustaceans seem to be so, like, hyper-aware of, like, size differences and such.
Yeah.
But, like, is it like that in all species?
No, not necessarily.
Like, do they understand the size difference and they just don't care? They're so mad they just go after it anyway?
Yeah, so that, I mean, you get some real deranged individuals. And not in humans. I mean, that happens in humans, but in other species as well.
I'm just thinking about, like, dogs, cats, like, anything we're even familiar with. Like,
Yeah, so in a lot of species, though, size is going to be important, right? We talked about the red deer last week, right? Size difference, antler size. They're going to walk, the lateral displace to kind of see fish will do this. It's not an uncommon thing, and it makes sense, right? I don't think most people would say. I mean, like if you're given the option between betting on two individuals in a fight, I think betting on the larger individual is the better way to go, right? I mean, for the most part, right? Okay. Now there are going to be exceptions to that, right? A Bruce Lee exception, right? Because I saw that movie where he beat Chuck Norris, and we all know Chuck Norris is taller. So I would have, like coming into that blind, I would have said Chuck Norris, and then not realizing Bruce Lee actually made that movie to make it, so of course he's going to win, right? That goes. So there are going to be times where there are going to be accidental victories. That happens, right? From time to time. I think most species are going to, if it's not absolute size, there's going to be some feature that you're looking for, right? In that. So like dogs, for example. Like dogs really will, like little dogs, whatever. I mean, they'll fight a big dog all the time, right? And that doesn't make a lot of sense. But here's the thing to keep in mind. Like the dogs that you have, I mean, we didn't breed them for brightness all the time, right? We bred them because they're cute and they keep you happy.
You fit in your purse.
I guess if you carry one of those dogs or a purse, right? So I think the dog thing, cats. So cats may be a different story, right? Because like cats are cats and they're all relatively the same size. Dogs are different because you can have like, you can have like a Jack Russell and a Mastiff, right? And there's a Jack Russell who will try to fight a Mastiff, maybe, right? But a lot of that is just going to be that sizing up process, right? Like dogs you'll even see this in dogs, they'll kind of bark, they'll snarl, right? They won't always get into an outright fight, right? And so they're doing that escalation pattern until the point where their owners typically intervene, or one of them goes, I can't keep up with this facade for much longer, I'm going to roll over and show you my belly. And that way I'm not going to hurt you. And that is actually a sign in dogs, they'll roll over and expose their vulnerable underside as an indication of subordination. But I think cats aren't that much different in size, right? But what makes a cat really fierce is like big teeth, right? Like I always fight a cat that doesn't have teeth, like if you've got the choice, right? Bro, so my cat, he's missing a tooth now. He's like 18 years old, so he had to have a tooth pulled recently, a year ago, which is not surprising, right? At that age, right? It's like an old cat. But I also don't mess with him because he's polydactyl, so he has like an extra claw on every foot, right? So I think, well, that's an extra advantage. Even though he's like short a tooth now, he's still got those extra claws. So I still try to not fight him.
Tell the class his name.
His name's 24, actually, because he has 24 toes. Yeah, and I've had him just about half my life, so yeah, I've had him a long time. I found him, he was like fully grown. I think he was probably like maybe a year or 2 years old. But, so the 18 years old is sort of an estimate, but I can account for like 17 of those years. So I feel like that's pretty solid, right, on the estimate for his age. And his eyes never dilate, so they're always like, seriously, he's been like that for years. They're like always wide open. Normally you get the little cat eye thing, doesn't happen. Stay wide open.
Is there something wrong with them?
I don't know. I mean, at this point, does it matter? I mean, as old as he is, whatever he's been doing has been working. So I'm just going to go with that. I take him to the vet periodically, and the vet says, "Oh, it's the healthiest cat I've seen all day." Like, okay, sounds fine to me. I'll take him home. But they do a vision test. I mean, like, the way you do a vision test on a cat is like you shine a light in its eye, and it goes. So you can see, and it still gets around fine. So I think he's fine. I mean, I don't know if he has any visual deficits. None that are really impeding his behavior. So there you go. Yeah, he's a tough old cat, though. He really is. He's missing part of his ear. He's got like chunks out of his ear. I found him that way. So there you go. All right. So we're going to go through that escalation process, whether you're a cat, a dog, lobster. It's easier to determine in lobsters because, again, remember that time I told you they only had like a few neurons and we knew what they all do? Yeah, we don't know that in cats even, right? Cats, believe it or not, have more complicated brains than lobsters. And cats are happy to hear that. Lobsters they're probably angry about it, Dina, and they're gonna try to fight a cat. I think a cat and a lobster would fight each other. I think that, but that's not aggression, because maybe the cat's trying to eat the lobster, right? And then that's just predatory behavior. So that doesn't count, right? So like when you attack like a Domino's pizza, right? That's just predation. It's not really aggressive behavior, right? And you're not really angry or upset or thinking that that pizza is going to steal your resources. You're just eating. Yeah. Not a real Domino's fan. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Because I think someone might try to bring me Domino's pizza and I'm gonna have to like act like I like that. Just to not hurt your feelings. Anybody work at Domino's? I don't know if anybody, no. Anybody like absolutely they don't eat any pizza but Domino's pizza? don't think anybody's in that group, right? So what happens is eventually somebody quits. Maybe they quit before the actual aggressive interaction, before the actual physical interaction. Maybe they don't. Maybe they have a few, shake back and forth, a few antennal flaps, whatever, right? They have a little go at it. The reason they quit, we don't really know what says, hey, I've had enough and I think it's not worth my time to continue this. What we do know is there are some changes in the escape circuit. Well, that was unique. I just wanted to make like a reference to For Whom the Bell Tolls or something. Like 4 of you understood that, and the rest just giggled politely. It tolls for thee, that's the answer. You guys read For Whom the Bell Tolls? And not the song. I just want to be clarified. Like there's some source material there, huh?
I read it in high school.
Yeah.
Middle school or something.
That's right when they try to tell you like you're gonna die. So like start acting like an adult.
Tried. Is the key word there. Tried.
Yeah. All right, so there's gonna be changes in that escape circuit. We're gonna talk a little bit about that. It's gonna be exciting. Hey, look at that. That's a crayfish in a hole. Remember I said they were better in holes than they were out on the wild, out loose. This is a crayfish burrow. That's kind of cool. So these dominance hierarchies. So when crayfish fight each other, and there's a winner and a loser, that winner becomes dominant to the loser, and the loser becomes subordinate to the winner. Well, that's not a shock. But let's say there are like, I don't know, how many crayfish do you want in your colony? 10? That's a number I think you can count that high. So, Dina, there are 10 crayfish. They're all going to fight each other. And they're all going to fight each other in a way that's going to create this linear hierarchy, right? So like, crayfish A is going to be dominant to everybody. And then crayfish B is going to be dominant to everybody but crayfish A, right? So, but then if crayfish 12, I'm just making up like not a number or not a letter, comes in and beats crayfish B, then all of a sudden it becomes dominant to B, and then everybody else kind of knocks down a level, right? So it's very linear. Okay. What's really interesting is in the crayfish that lose, they actually stop building homes. They're not even going to waste their time on that. Like if you're a crayfish and you get beaten up and peed on, you're going to stop trying to build a home. And the reason is like, why would you waste your resources if you're a loser? Right? I mean, like, why build a home for somebody else to take it from you? It is. So now Dina, our crayfish, are no longer angry, they're sad. Is that okay?
I just want to know if they like actually feel like emotions.
Do you actually feel emotions? That's a really existential question. That's beyond the scope of. So it's like this. Here's how I think about a lot of these things. Like, I'm going to tell you like free will, right? So like you have free will. Who knows and who cares? Like, so why waste your time on it? You either have it, good luck, or you don't, keep rolling. So and trying to figure it out is not going to get you anywhere.
Okay.
Does that work?
It's noted. Like.
I think they, as much as their nervous system is capable, they receive sensory inputs, and they take those sensory inputs to create a cohesive understanding of their environment so that they can respond to that appropriately and survive. And I think that exact same statement applies to people.
They have serotonergic neurons too, right? That's what the nursery's all about down there, right?
We're going to get there. They do. We're going to talk about serotonin in just a moment. And then that's going to segue into like next week when all we talk about serotonin. Because serotonin and aggression, they're sort of related. Just as a little preview in case you didn't catch that. Yeah, but that is, serotonin. Get some. Well, if you don't have any, I mean, getting some serotonin will help your mood, right, JP? I mean, that's
Yeah,
it's the whole idea behind SSRIs.
exactly. Just gotta get some of it.
So, crayfish. They'll stop actually building burrows. And that makes a lot of sense, right? So like, really, if you are the bottom crayfish, right, why would you build a home that the next crayfish above you or any other crayfish in your colony is just going to take? Is there any reason why you would do that? Seems like a waste of time. You know what you'd be better off doing? Like squirming around and waiting until like one of those other crayfish like left their home and then slip in for like a little 20-minute visit and then try to slide out. And that's what, not necessarily crayfish, that's what a lot of other species will do. If you're not one of the, they do this in, I'm going to tell you a story about, I think elephant seals. Yeah. Who loves elephant seals? You know they're the seals with the big elephant sounds, right? So in this species, like males are much larger than females, right? And so they have what's called sexual dimorphism. So, and we have this in humans, right? On average, males are going to be larger than females, right? And so that's, most people know that. That's true in a lot of species. Males tend to be slightly larger than females. There's probably some math you could do, Meredith, to figure out like how many partners you should have, like mating partners based on the size difference between males and females in a species. And you can figure that out if you want. But how it works in like elephant seals or other pinnipeds, which are the things with flippers, right? They they typically have like one male who's huge, and he has like a harem of the females, right? And then there are like all these other like females kind of or males hanging out on the side, who've got to like catch him not looking for a few minutes and in and out, right? And the female elephant seals, they'll encourage this kind of behavior, right? Because they're all about like genetic diversity too, right? So, like, yeah, he's great and all, but I wish he was a little more compassionate. So let me find, just kind of mix that in to the genetic makeup there. And so I think if you're like at the bottom crayfish, right? That's probably the strategy that would be better for you. Like instead of like wasting all your time building a house that somebody's going to take, you're never going to be able to put like another crayfish in there. Just go in and try to like slip into somebody else's house when they're not looking, and see if you can impregnate a crayfish that way. Fish will do this. There are some fish, interestingly, that look like male fish on one side and female fish on the other. So I know, right? It's kind of weird. And so what they'll do is they'll kind of slide in between like a regular female that looks like a female and like a regular male who looks like a male on both sides. And so they'll put the female side to the male and the male side to the female, and they'll impregnate the female while the other male thinks it's impregnating the male who looks like a female on one side of its body. That's a really weird story, isn't it? And nobody was ready for that one. Brad, you're letting this percolate, and I feel like you have something. You're just imagining this, like how do you know what's a male and a female fish, right? You're thinking like, how does one side look versus the other? In some species, there are different sort of like color patterns, right? Okay, so you're not going to waste your time. If you're a loser, you're not going to build a house, so don't even waste your time on it. It is important to remember who beat you, right? And guess how you're going to do that? You're going to smell their urine. Remember, you can smell urine, even in crayfish. You don't do individual identification. Just you can smell urine and tell if it's more dominant or subordinate to you, right? And so what you should always do if you're a crayfish is when you go visiting, go, I apologize, I hate to be rude, but can you tell me where the bathroom is? And then go in and smell their urine, and then see if you can actually kick them out or not. And then just go visit another crayfish. Right, Chelsea, if that one seems to be dominant to you. That's always a good trick. You can try this the next time you're at a dinner party. I don't know if you're at dinner parties. I've been to exactly 0 dinner parties in my life, but for some reason the world tells me I should have these and go to them. But it seems like a waste of time. Because I can eat dinner by myself and I don't have to talk to you. Right, so that seems like a better deal, right? Or I can even go out to dinner and I don't even have to clean like dishes later. It seems like a better way to do it. So you could try this. Like the next time you go visit someone, like you're over at your friend's house, go to their bathroom and hopefully they've not flushed in a while, and you can get a whiff and figure out whether or not you can kick them out of their apartment and take it. Brooke's thinking about this. She's like, I know somebody who's got a nice apartment, and I think I'm bigger. So we're going to try that. I can just see in there like, you've been in there a while, Brooke, what are you doing? Nothing. Haven't determined yet, right? Just looking for a cotton swab. That's always a good excuse, right? They won't ask you why you need one. Right after that, they're just going to go like, here's where they are. And assume you just have an itch in the ear. Always a good excuse if you need a cotton swab, Katie, and you're like, don't, just tell my ear was itching, I couldn't put my finger there. What about, hey Montana, what about that hormonal control of aggressive behavior? I understand that some people might be interested in this. We're going to talk a little bit about it in the last few minutes that we have here. So, how many of you have heard of hormones? How many of you have hormones? Yeah, everybody does. So that's a universal you do. Okay? And those hormones do things, and they make you do things. And what's really surprising, I think, to me at least, it's not surprising to me because I know this, but I think what might be surprising to you is exactly like how much of your day-to-day activity is really just driven by hormones, right? It's just you responding to hormones. Okay? Your hormone levels fluctuate day to day. They fluctuate week to week, moment to moment, right? They're going up, they're going down. Some people in this room have steadier hormones, like certain hormones, than others, right? Okay? You can figure out like which group is which, right? So there's the facial hair group that's pretty steady hormone levels that have some minor fluctuations here and there. There's the non-facial hair group that has some bigger fluctuations, like on a 28-day cycle. And so you can think about how that affects your internal states and feelings and behaviors. So we have other hormones. How many of you have heard of cortisol? That's a hormone, right? You guys all probably, not today, but here in a few weeks, you'll have a cortisol spike on a Thursday at about 4 o'clock, right? That's going to be like exam day. Already, some of you are already. Right? Sometimes you get a little cortisol spike in the morning, too. That helps you get out of bed because it's a little bit of a stimulant, right? That's always a good idea. Anybody have difficulty getting out of bed? Like you're like, oh boy, I could just, like you're slow to get started in the morning? Probably because you're stress-free. No, that's not it? That's what I tell people. I'm like, no, I'm stress-free. That's why it takes me a little while to get moving in the mornings. I like to get up. I like to eat a bowl of King Vitamin. Watch some cartoons. I still do eat King Vitamin. It's a good cereal.
I've never seen that.
Seriously? It used to be, it's bad, I mean, it's the same cereal. The box used to be better. It had a cutout mask on the back of like the king or a knight or a jester, which was kind of cool because you could like cut it out and then like cut out the eyes and you had a mask, which was awesome when you were a kid. Now it's all one of these like highlights magazines, find the flag or the hidden objects. You guys have been to the dentist, you know the highlights magazine. Everybody's dentist has a highlights magazine. Comes with the dental degree. You get a free highlights subscription for a year. So, we're going to talk a little bit about serotonin today. We don't have a whole lot of time. Next week, we're going to talk a whole lot about serotonin, right? So this is a little intro to serotonin. Serotonin and other monoamines, like dopamine, for example. This one's sort of a crustacean specific, so we're not going to worry about that one too much, right? So that's not like a real big role in humans. But serotonin and dopamine are clearly big hormones. How many of you have heard of serotonin and or dopamine? Like everybody, right? I mean, it's not like a big secret. But serotonin is directly coordinated with aggressive behavior. If you have more serotonin, you are less aggressive. It's that simple. I mean, it's that straightforward. So there you go. How many of you have heard of SSRIs? Yeah. The whole point there is to increase your serotonin levels. Why would you give someone an SSRI? Depression. Also, because they're angry and aggressive all the time. They're irritable, right? That's another reason to give people an SSRIs, because they're irritable. You can give people SSRIs for a variety of things. My assumption is that all of you in this class know someone who's taking an SSRI. I feel like they're fairly commonly prescribed. They're fairly effective, low side effect sort of profile, at least compared to some other things. So I feel like you guys probably all know somebody on an SSRI, right? But what's cool is they'll give SSRIs to crayfish. Remember that time? I know Dina had this real problem with it, but I said like crayfish are angry. Guess what happens if you give crayfish an SSRI? They do, right? Yeah, they're not going to be as aggressive. They're not going to attack as much. They're going to be more likely to flee, right? Because that's the other sort of response in a situation where you're threatened, right? You're going to be more likely to flee than actually have that sort of aggressive attack. Which is actually really sort of interesting because there are many neural circuits that are modulated by serotonin in the crayfish. But what's, I think, fascinating about this is that the direction in which serotonin modulates this circuit depends on your social status. Yeah, I know, that's pretty, it's like serotonin, at least in crayfish, seems to affect what we call gain control rather than like actual direction, right? Rather than saying that serotonin is going to always make you mellow out, which it doesn't. It might make you more likely to attack if you are a dominant. If you're a dominant crayfish, it's going to make you more likely to attack. Now, I think that's really fascinating, right? Because it's the same molecule, it's the same circuit. There's obviously something else going on. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but I think that's really interesting. If you're a dominant, how many of you have ever been like the greatest accordion player in the world? Nobody? No, I'm a little surprised with that. Let's imagine, how many of you, and just think about it, how many of you have ever been really great at something? And then you had a challenger sort of come in. What's one of the best ways to sort of respond to that? I mean, do you just flee? That's not your response. That's not really going to make that's not going to make that stressful situation go away, right, Dean? Okay. What might make it go away is if you were to try a little harder. If you were to challenge that new individual and defeat them, right? And so if you're that dominant crayfish, there's like some upstart little crayfish coming in, you're like, oh, this guy's, threatening me. What am I going to do? I'm just going to whack him with an antenna, right? I'm not going to run away from him. And then, so you might think, well, that might actually reduce aggression in that way as well, right? So it's kind of interesting. Like two different behaviors, same molecule, serotonin, but we get sort of two different outcomes. I found that really fascinating. Brad, are you interested in that at all? So then I wonder, like what if I gave, I'm going to think about somebody really aggressive. What if I gave Mike Tyson, and like 1980s Mike Tyson, right, Lauren, because that man was dangerous. What if I gave him serotonin? Would that make him more likely to punch people? Because maybe that for him, like if he was a crayfish, because I would say 1980s Mike Tyson was a dominant individual, right? I mean, I think in the boxing, right? And then like let's imagine, it's the 1980s. I'm going to try to box him, and I'm like somewhere between -3 and 6 in the 1980s, and that's not going to work, right? I don't even know, although it might, because because they can't punch below the belt. There's not going to be a lot of places where he can really hit me because I'm short. So maybe you could win. There's a little side story for the pugilistic fans out there. So I don't know, right? So I want to do that study. I want to go back in time to to the 1980s, I want to give Mike Tyson serotonin and see if he's better at boxing. Like I want to have that alternate universe and see if that happens. Because if he's a crayfish, that's what happens. He's going to challenge more people. He's going to throw in a few extra bouts, you know. But if he's not a crayfish, then maybe something else happens, right? So I don't know. Anybody excited about that? Who's like an aggressive person? Like, what's the? Unfortunately, I never moved over to UFC. I don't know if any of you are UFC fans. I know some of you are. Nobody's going to admit to it, and that's okay. What's his name? Conor McGregor? Is that him? Yeah. I don't know. Let's give that guy serotonin and see what happens. Right? Is he going to become more aggressive or less aggressive? If he's a crayfish, probably more aggressive. But if he's not, then maybe less aggressive. I don't know. Anybody excited by that? Who's going to get like tickets to his next bout and get a dart gun, try to shoot him with a little serotonin and see what happens?
Let's make it a class project. We'll all go. It'll be like
No! We have an even better class project because of you, and it just hit me. Yeah. What we can do, I'm assuming there's some aggression involved in roller derby, right? So we can do this right now. We can go to your class, or your next bout.
I have practice right after this, so we could go. We can all go.
And then we can give some. So who's the best player on your team? Identify that for us. And you can say you. That's fine.
Okay.
And then what we'll do is we'll give you serotonin and see if that makes you better or worse. And then we'll give serotonin to the worst player and see what that does to that individual. It's an exciting experiment now.
That's weird.
All we need to do is procure some SSRIs, which I think we can do, right? I mean, for like $10, and I think someone will sell us something. That's how these things work, right? I think my feeling on this is if I need a medication that does something to the way I feel, I just kind of run around 8th Avenue with a $10 bill, and people like throw things at me. Is that not how it works? No. Oh. No, Brad's like thinking I'm going to try this. You know,
that is pretty much how it works.
I thought so.
That's how it's.
But I'm actually in a position to get a DEA license, and I think I could just like get things. I think I can get things better than SSRIs with a DEA license, right? Hey, I've got one more slide. So we want to talk about neural mechanisms as sort of an extension of that hormonal control we just talked about. And here are some of the neurons: the jittery movement detectors, the large giant, or the lateral giant, the medial giant, and the defense interneurons. What's really interesting about this is there are like tail flips for escape, right? And there are like 3 different circuits that control tail flips. And during an aggressive encounter, these circuits can be enhanced or inhibited, right? Depending, again, on the sort of social status of the animal. What's really interesting about this is there are circuits that are responsible for sort of forward movements and backward movements for crayfish, for example, right? And the ones that are responsible for forward movements are going to be amped up if it's a dominant crayfish. If it's a subordinate crayfish, the ones that are for escape are going to be amped up. And then what you can do is and you got to be careful with this, you can get in the middle of it, because you don't want to lose the finger, in the middle of a crayfish fight, and you can kind of tickle one. Because, I mean, how many of you have ever tried to catch a crayfish? And what happens when you touch it? It's gone, right? And depending on where you touch it, depends on which way it goes. Okay? So you can do this. But if it's that dominant crayfish, and you touch it on the belly, it's not going to run away. Normally it would run away if it's in a normal situation, but it's going to run toward. And it's going to swim toward, because it's going to be thinking it's dominant and it can take over. If you touch it in the subordinate crayfish, if you touch it on the abdomen, it'll run away, because it's, again, that subordinate crayfish. So there you go. I think that's fascinating. I hope the rest of you think it's fascinating as well. Any questions? That's sort of the end of what I have. Next week we are going to talk a lot more about serotonin, so be ready for that. Kind of lead you up to that. I promise fewer urine references. Maybe not zero, but fewer. Huh?
I'm not gonna show up.
You're not going to show up if there are fewer references. And I will, for those of you who have asked, post these slides soon.
Thank you.